character that looked like like a Weetabix cereal with legs, and so we were going to do this game based upon this, and I wrote graphic editors, I wrote run length compression routines for graphics to do all this stuff, and of course they could never produce the game because of the fact that they hadn't been in touch with Weetabix about this, and so it's like hello, and so the company went under just as I basically had finished the game. It took me like 8 months to do this thing, and the few people who ever saw this thing thought that they thought the graphics were okay. I did all the graphics myself. They thought the game really sucked, but they thought the sound was just like fantastic. They thought the music was great. So I thought, okay, that kind of puts me game -5, graphics, like 2, music like 8. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. So I started, sending demos out, and eventually somebody, give us a break, and I started doing tunes. The earliest things that I did were for Mastertronics, which was the Action Biker, and the thing on a spring for Gremlin Graphics. So I want to talk about a little bit about what happened and how that really evolved into a culture. What happened was, in the early days when I started doing that stuff, it was very much kind of like, okay, I'm going to do something which I think is very kind of middle of the road and very toy-like, So those early games were very much very simple kind of, games and very simple little tunes. And then something strange happened, where after somewhere around about, what was the game called? God. It was after One Man and His Droid, which was one of the early games. There was another game after that called The Last V8, and another game called Phantoms of the Asteroid, where basically they were letting me just write anything I wanted to write, and and everybody thought that everything was just fantastic, And at that time, it turned into just a dream of a job, because you were getting paid money for writing exactly what you wanted to write, and not only that, it got even more bizarre because it turned into it developed into a cultural thing, and one of the things that happened was there was a demo scene started to evolve because of that. There was a huge, pirate scene in Germany at that time of hackers and crackers and people like that, and I was telling one of the guys yesterday about it, where they used to call me up and say, "What are you working on? What game are you working on?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm doing this thing for software projects called Dragon's Lair or something, And they say, "Have you finished it?" I says, "Yeah, I've sent all my stuff off. The game is supposed to be released in a couple of weeks." And they had like great pride in cracking the game, and they would send me a disc of a cracked game before it was released, and they'd put their own message on there, a scrolling message and stuff. And so there was a period that I went through where every morning I would get up and the postman would come. Like in those days, the postman would come twice a day. The postman would come and knock on the door, and there'd be a bloody big pile of discs. And then he'd come later on in the day, there'd be another bloody big pile of discs, and they were all from all these different kind of crack groups, and they had such pride in they wanted to be the first, not only to send me a copy of the game before it was released, but with their own messages on there. And the one of the other things that was around probably, I don't know, maybe 1986, 87, there was a thing called CompuNet. I don't know if anybody's heard of CompuNet. But this was in the early days of the modem. You used to have this ugly looking device which used to go onto your telephone, and there was a box you used to hook up to a C64. It was used to run at 72 baud. So, you know, if anybody knows anything about modems, the modems, you know, telephone modems on a PC run at 56k baud. This used to run at 72 baud. So that's literally, you know, one character a second, 8 by 8 pixels. So anyway, a lot of people used to they subscribed to this CompuNet thing, and that also basically was a way of sending text messages. It was like a real primitive kind of a chat room thing back then. The only problem was it used to create horrendous phone bills. But that also helped develop this whole culture. And then, you know, I would say around about, you know, 1986, it was the whole kind of C64 game scene had really changed a lot and developed into a kind of this European culture where not only did the games reflect a certain culture, but the music also reflected a culture as well. The music at that time was really heavily influenced by a lot of other things that were going on in the 1980s. Like, for instance, in the 80s, there was a new romantic movement going on. A lot of synth bands were playing. A lot of the people who were involved on the, you know, the early days of the C64 were all listening to people like, you know, Jean-Michel Jarre and Kraftwerk and all these kind of bands. And so that influenced what people did. And also because of the fact that the C64, you know, you only had like the 3 voices to play with, that also limited what you could do musically. And so you tended to, you know, the limitations of the machine force you to write in a certain kind of a stylistic way, which helped to develop that culture. The other thing about being involved in the early days of what was going on was that there was a real sense of, you know, although you didn't know it at the time because you were just kind of riding this whole tide, this whole tidal wave of kind of development. But at the time, there was a lot of pioneering going on with everything to do with games and music and computers, and the sense of freedom that people had in those days was just extraordinary, because you could branch out and, you know, do pretty much whatever you wanted to do, and as long as it didn't sound like this drunken monkey trying to play the Blue Danube, you know, people would really be happy with what was going on. The sense of you know, looking back on those days, the sense of enjoyment was just unbelievable, because the you know, like I say, watching everybody here reminds me of what I used to be like in the 1980s. I had an absolute blast. I mean, I loved every minute of it. I just couldn't wait, you know, to get out of bed, you know, get up the next morning and switch on the machine, and, you know, I would dream up, you know, some crazy thing that I could add to you know, assembly language routine to do something, and I couldn't wait to code it up and see if I could get this thing to do what I wanted to do. And it was just an absolute. Probably for me, I would say that was, probably the most fun that I ever